Carlee Myers, welcome to the show. Whathasmyattention.com. And so here we go. Carlee's from, her website, and we'll mention this at the end of the show as well, is stresslessco.com. And do you remember where we met?
We met through a mutual friend, Mary Kravitz,
Uh
the one and
huh.
only.
Yes. Yeah, no kidding, the one and only. And she has a really fabulous networking group online, and you can get to it by going to watchusthrive.com. And she does these really, really well. And you and I were on a 15-minute kind of a meet and greet with her, right?
Absolutely, yep.
Yeah. So how are you this morning?
I'm doing good. It's a beautiful Thursday morning, which is my equivalent of a Friday morning. So, TJ, T, I was going to say TGIT.
Thank God it's Thursday. Yeah, I
No,
usually, yeah. Today's
it's
the April 22nd. It happens to be Earth Day. Did you know that?
I did. I actually this morning woke up to all these Earth Day posts and I was like, when the heck is Earth Day?
Yeah,
Googled it. It's today.
yeah. I think it's unfortunate it's only celebrated once a year, but oh
I
well.
know. I
Yeah,
know.
yeah. So great. So given stress-free zone, stresslessco.com, we can talk a little bit about stress, but we also agreed that in this conversation, we're going to allow it to go wherever we want it to go. So if you have a fabulous recipe for apple pie, let us know.
I actually do, but if I could
Oh,
remember it off
really?
the top of my head, that'd be
Yeah.
a whole nother story.
Well, I used to make, I made 20 apple pies at a time when I was working in a country inn
Oh
on
my
Orcas
goodness.
Island years ago. Yeah, we had a restaurant there and we had just the best apple pie. People would drive from Seattle and jump on a ferry to come to the Outlook Inn there to have a piece of homemade apple pie, homemade vegetable soup, and homemade bread. And it was like $2.95.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I don't think I probably don't think I could compete at that level. My apple pie is just one of those recipes where you're just like a little bit of this, a little bit of that, bada boom,
Sure.
bada bing.
Sure.
And I think the max I've ever done was 3 pies at
Uh,
one time.
uh-huh.
But talk to me about my strawberry pear jam pie.
No,
Whole
you
nother
talk to me
level.
about your strawberry pear jam pie. And we'll be including that recipe in the episode notes, or
Uh
maybe
oh.
not.
If I can remember it, that one
Are
is
you
living
kidding?
in my mind.
Yeah. Well, I worked with somebody in the end at the end that had a killer strawberry rhubarb pie,
Mm,
and then one of our associates actually would go to Vancouver, British Columbia, and come back with bird's eye custard. So
interesting.
yeah, so that pie turned into a strawberry rhubarb custard pie, which was unfreaking believable.
Oh man.
It had too much sugar in it. We, generally speaking, we had to call the medics on the island to just stand by because we're getting ready to eat the pie.
It's like
Yeah.
eating the burger with like 12 layers of meat.
Oh yeah,
Something's
yeah,
bound to
yeah,
happen.
yeah. I've
For
gotten
sure.
very, very committed to doing non-meat trproducts, as in
Hmm.
impossible. Yep. So I've been experimenting with it, and I totally understand that. Let's not talk about the environment too much today, but that it's pretty important to understand that the whole manufacturing of meats, all meats actually, no matter what it is, has a really, really high carbon footprint. It's
Mm.
devastating.
Yeah, it's on that note, just to just bringing it, what's bringing it up for me, or what that's
Mm-hmm.
bringing up for me, is that how disconnected we are as a as the human race to our like how we get food, how we get
Yeah.
water, how we get our basic needs, shelter built, how we get our basic needs met. And I think that's been one of my really fun journeys over the last few years is engaging with my family history and my culture. I grew up in rural Maryland, and so
Mm.
we do a lot of canning. My dad hunts. Just
Oh,
a lot of that culture is really, really like people kind of brush it off, but it's actually really important
yeah.
um, to know this. So
Yeah. Yeah. So I love people like that, if you want to know the truth.
what is it
Yeah.
about them?
Just they're very close to the earth, very down to earth, very grounded. You kind
Yeah.
of have that, you have that essence about you as well.
Oh, thanks.
So
That's
let's talk about being stress free because should have done this podcast. Like I said, it's April 22nd, 2021. Probably could have done this a year ago. Would have been a lot more
mhm.
useful for a lot of people. Did you
Yeah.
find yourself working with a lot of people during that time?
Yeah, we had really an unprecedented demand for our services during the pandemic, and it was really interesting because going into March, like that first week of shutdown, it was quiet for a bit, but I think we were all just navigating, including myself, navigating a huge shift, which was quarantine, and
Yeah.
and then you know over the next few months into 2020, it really just we had more outreach than we've ever had. And I mean, it says a lot though, because at the beginning of the pandemic, I kept telling people, like everyone was talking about this second wave, which we've already been through, or maybe we're in right now. But everyone was talking about this second wave of COVID, and I was like, no, you've already missed the second wave. The second wave is the mental health crisis that's coming as a result of
Oh.
this. And because you think about the statistics around stress pre-pandemic, 80% of people were experiencing high levels of stress, according to, I think it was like a 2018 Gallup poll. 80% pre pandemic.
Pre-pandemic, what was the nature of their stress, do you think?
It could really, there's about 5 to 10 top stressors. The number one and the number two are fairly predictable: money, job pressure. Depending
Mm.
on your gender, one will be more likely to be your main stressor than the other. And then it goes into relationships, health, like chronic health concerns. Nutrition is one of those things. Um, it really can be a variety of things, but those are the ones that are really showing up a lot for sure.
Mm. Hmm. And so then pandemic happens, and
Pand-
80% that 80% percentile changes.
My guess is it does. I think it those 20%, maybe it skyrocketed a little bit. There's always those people that have a deeper connection with themselves, that are able to
Mm.
manage stress in a way that is healthy for them. So the way that the stress that we actually experience is really a formula. So just for context here. So we
Sure.
have the thing that happens to us, and then we have the perception of that thing. And then that equation, those two things combined, is actually the stress that we experience. So there still may have been during the pandemic 10%, 5%. Maybe it stayed at 20. I don't know because they didn't do another poll during the pandemic. But that experienced the stressor, but their perception of it wasn't negative. They didn't think I can't handle this. They didn't stress it. They didn't create meaning behind it that meant this is bad for me. So they didn't experience the stress that many of us did.
Yeah. So for those people that became stressed during pandemic or even stressed pre-pandemic, so this is where having a conversation with you about this is great. So I consider most of the time it's an inside job.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like the stories we tell ourselves. It's
Mm-hmm.
about living in, they live in the future.
Yeah. Yeah,
That.
it's really deeply about perception.
Hmm.
No, of course we have those outside stressors, those things that, like, a natural disaster comes,
Hmm.
tragedy hits, right? That is something that's outside of our control, and most of us are going to experience a level of stress with that. But the stressors that are causing 80% of at least the US population to feel stressed are things that are absolutely within our control. Things, whether it's rewiring the neural pathways to create a different story, or if it's uncluttering your freaking desk already because it's causing unnecessary stress, right?
Yeah. So yeah, give me a typical scenario working with a. Now, are these individuals or businesses or?
Yeah, so I actually work with two different kind of demographics, if you will. So I
Hmm.
work one-on-one with individuals, and then I also work with small to medium-sized teams. So, but all of the work across the board, whether it's with teams or with an individual who is hiring me, I actually work with the individual members of the team, if that makes sense. So it's all individual work, just depends on how I'm hired. So typically, the way that I work with people is that every single one of them goes through this thing called the stress less method. And the stress less method is something that I ended up creating, first of all, out of necessity, but also out of my own personal experiences. Because in my journey, I learned very quickly, very early on, that there is no one size fits all when it comes to stress management. And even more so, that the mainstream approaches that everybody's talking about, therapy, meditation, yoga, hitting the gym, changing your diet, while important and can be really impactful, don't necessarily help everyone. There may be something deeper that can't be resolved fully by all of these things or one of these things. So each and every one of my clients goes through this system to figure out, first of all, what is blocking them. So that's actually step 2 in my system. It's identifying your blocks. So if we were to work together, one of the first things that we would do is create a thorough inventory of everything that is currently bothering you, everything that's got you pissed off, that's got you angry, that's got you stressed, overwhelmed, depressed, sad, whatever. And we create a really thorough inventory to figure out, okay, this is the surface, this is the symptom, this is the after effect of something deeper. And we do the deep work to figure out exactly what that deep block is, whether it's a limiting belief, whether it's just a bad habit, whether it's shifting something bigger. But we figure out what that block is, and then we create that resolution. And that really moves into steps 3, creating your vision, and steps 4, removing those blocks. What I will say in terms of working with people is that I work very differently than the typical mentor or coach. And, most coaches in the industry, you'll sign up for a 3-month package, a 6-month package, and you're good, you get the information, I'm fixed, even though you're not fixed, right? And you go on your way and you try to find yourself another coach or mentor. The way that I work is that we come into the relationship with an understanding that this is a life's work, that we are experiencing high levels of stress, likely because we've had thing after thing after thing pile up, and we've got a lifetime of unpiling to do and rewiring to do to experience more peace, more contentment, whatever that beautiful state of mind is.
It's interesting, during the pandemic, I became aware, probably, I want to say June of 2020, that I became aware that people weren't talking about their issues. They weren't talking about their stress. They weren't talking about their fears. They weren't talking about any of that at all. And so I started in my conversations and, started doing family calls every 2 weeks with family members all the way from Seattle all the way to Paris, France. And I just brought it up one time at a call, and it was revealing. It's really important to talk about those things, about being vulnerable, to be able to, talk about things,
Yeah. And I would say it's not about, I think a lot of people, when they hear the word vulnerable, they think I have to air out all my dirty laundry, and then they might judge me, and they'll never see me the same again, or I'll get exiled from the friend group because they'll think I'm weird, or whatever, right? But when we're talking about vulnerability here, what we're talking about is when someone, and you can tell based on their energy and how they're showing up in the conversation, when someone genuinely asks how you are, and they're willing to hold the space and hear you, sharing that, because 1, you'll feel better because you'll feel seen and you'll feel heard, and 2, you create the space for the other person to do the same. And that can create a really beautiful kind of reciprocal relationship, where if we're standing on our, for instance, social media vulnerability, where we go on social media and we're here's all my shit, here it is, pardon my French, right? And that is not the same That is,
No.
here's my dirty laundry. This is attention seeking.
Yes.
Versus seeking support. And I like the image that comes to my mind. I'm such a visual person. Is like if you post on social, you're balancing on one leg, right?
No,
Because
that's a great metaphor.
Right? Yeah. And so, but here's the thing: if we post that stuff on social media, we're balancing on one leg. But if we share that same stuff, maybe in a way that is vulnerable and grounded and real, right? Not attention seeking with
And
someone
not
else.
hurtful.
And not hurt. There's some social context here.
Mm-hmm.
And that other person feels safe enough to do the same. You both still may be standing on one leg, but you're able to lean on each other and support each other. And together, you're so much stronger.
And the other thing that I'm seeing is, as you're talking about it, is that here's what I notice, and just so you know, I like to take the we out of the conversation.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And say the I. So I will say that when I allow myself to be transparent to another, it's another way of saying being vulnerable, and they feel comfortable to do the same thing. Essentially what I've done is not only have I served myself, but I have served them. Mm-hmm. I have opened the door for them to do the same.
Yeah.
So rather
100%.
than thinking about it from me, it is a way to connect with people in service, really.
Yeah. I was just on a Zoom call the other day where a woman was asked, it was a context of support. So we come together for support. And so she stepped forward for support in this group. It's a small group. And she shared, what was going on in her life and her relationships and how she was struggling, and she asked for support. And for me, I wasn't even part of that conversation. I was kind of like part of the container, but not necessarily part of the conversation. And her sharing that had me feeling so seen. Because there was a time in my life where I was experiencing those exact same things. Where I was experiencing, having trouble speaking up for what I needed in my relationship, or, whatever it was that she shared. And so she had no idea until I reached out to her later in the day that just by her sharing, I felt validated. I felt seen. And I didn't have to share back, right? So this can be the power of vulnerability. It doesn't even have to be a conversation between two people. It can just be being witnessed. And one of the things that I was just journaling about, writing about this morning is that even if you feel like something that you're doing is creating negative energy, for instance, you're sharing something that makes you feel really negative, so you feel like it creates a negative ripple effect. In fact, that thing that feels so negative to you could actually create light or a sense of love or a sense of groundedness in someone else's life.
Well, that's incredible. So is that part of what you do with individuals and clients and stuff?
Yeah, I think a big part of what we do is being seen, is being heard. What I do as part of my programs is we meet twice a month for community-wide calls where first of all, I teach real-time relevant teachings based on what's happening in the world, what I see is happening in the community amongst each client, and what I see the needs are. But then each of my clients steps forward if they feel called, if they feel they need support, and they ask. And that community is really, really powerful. That sense of visibility, that sense of vulnerability, it creates connection amongst every single one of my clients. But more often than not, I just had a client say this the other day. She's like, oh my goodness, thank goodness she shared that, because I was taking notes like crazy. I needed to hear that. I didn't even know I needed to hear that, but that's it. That's
so
the
that
thing.
was maybe that was something within her that was kind of below the surface that allowed it to come above and be looked at by her.
Exactly. Yeah, because really we talked about earlier with the inventory that I do with my clients. The whole point of that inventory is to say, okay, here's the symptom, but what's beneath the surface? Now, this particular client hadn't quite stepped into that process yet. And so she was like, oh, I see the connection, right? Here's where it is. And that's the power, is really getting to the root, getting to that place, because it's empowering, right? Rather than feeling stuck, like I don't know what to do, or I'm overwhelmed by all the choices, or there's something wrong with me, or whatever. That particular client was then able to say, oh, here's what it is. Here's what I can do about it. And this, I don't have to carry this anymore.
Nice. Could you actually lead me through a little exercise that you might be doing with people? And, you know, it's interesting because one thing I just saw was that working with individuals who are working at their jobs or working at business, you know, I can't help feel that it would have an impact on the place they spend 8 hours a day, Monday through Friday at.
Yeah.
So this is really, really good stuff. But yeah, maybe a little taste of an exercise.
Yeah. Well, so we could go down the I'm trying to decide which exercise. So let's actually start with a very basic exercise, because I think that this is important. And I'm going to give you context before we step into it. So the context is that when we're in a stress state, or when we're in that fight, flight, or freeze mode, the first thing that goes out of the window is critical thinking. So in our businesses...
What, you're assuming people have a lot of critical thinking, which...
Even the littlest bit of critical thinking we had goes out the window when we...
Okay, Carlee, we're going to have to define critical thinking.
Okay?
What's your definition?
Our ability to problem solve. Right? So
Pretty simple.
Pretty simple. So our ability to solve problems goes out the window. And I should say solve problems effectively goes out the window.
Yeah.
So when we're in fight, flight, or freeze mode, we're more likely to act from a place of fear. So for instance, a lot of the patterns that I'll see with clients that end up working with me, now keeping in mind that most people come to me because they feel like they've already tried everything. There's nothing left to try. They've tried meditation, they've tried therapy, they've tried yoga, they've tried this coach, they've tried that, and I lost my thought here, so we're going to have to bring it back.
Critical thinking.
Critical thinking. So we have like these people who've tried all of these things. They come to me. They're like, nothing works. Nothing works. That's it. They go, and here's where my thought was. The critical thinking is this, or the piece here is this, that when we're overwhelmed, when we feel like we're freaking out, one of the things that I see with my clients when they get into that mode, that critical thinking is lost, is they immediately go out and they purchase any coaching program, any training, anything that they can get their hands on to try to solve the problem, even if that thing that they've bought has nothing to do with the problem. So for instance, when we're feeling stressed and overwhelmed, we go and buy a fitness program. Now, while working out is really great in terms of releasing endorphins and getting fit, it doesn't necessarily get to the root of why we're feeling exhausted and overwhelmed, right? And so that critical thinking, that inability to problem solve effectively, can show up in big ways this way. And that's why we see people hiring coach after coach after coach, because the critical thinking isn't at where it needs to be.
Sometimes the coaching's the problem, huh?
Sometimes it's the symptom. It's the panic buy. It's the, I just need something to deal with this. But it's not really looking at really what's beneath the surface. So that's really, really important. And that's why actually my enrollment process with my clients is very different than a typical coach's, because I don't allow for that to happen. You want to stress buy, we're going to sit through this and we're going to figure out if this is even the right fit. One, because I want to make sure that you as a client get what you need from this. But two, it's going to make me look hella bad if you come in my program and you do not succeed, if you do not achieve the results, right?
Yeah.
So two-part. It's good for the client, it's good for me if we sit and do that work.
Well, the other thing is if you have a client come into you that says nothing works, that's the place I would start.
Mm-hmm.
I would challenge it and I would say, nothing?
Mm-hmm.
And are you willing to consider possibly
X, Y,
changing
and Z.
that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because nothing will change if you maintain that mantra.
Exactly. But I think that in that conversation, that person, like where I would go with that is that that person is having this conversation because deep down they know that that's not true.
Mm.
They wouldn't even, if that mantra was really true for them, they wouldn't have even shown up for the call.
Mm.
And so that's really going back to say, here's your own evidence. I mean, you're here. Some part of you thought that this might work, even if it feels crazy, even if it feels insane.
Yeah.
But to circle back to the exercise that I mentioned, this exercise is really about making sure that we have that ability to problem solve, even after experience something that we view as really stressful. And the goal of this is for us to engage in this so that we can enter a state of rest and digest, so that we can have clear thought. And then we can go into some of the following steps, like figuring out what our deeper blocks are. Now, this can literally be anything. Now, so I guess I'll give you the umbrella. So the umbrella is, this exercise is called creative stress reduction.
Creative being the key word, huh?
Creative being the key word because it really tunes into the idea of creative solutions, right? Nothing works. Are you sure? Are you sure it's just not the mainstream stuff that's not working? Are you sure it's not just X, Y, and Z that you've tried that's not working, right? So creative stress reduction is really any activity that gets us out of fight, flight, or freeze mode and gets us into that state of play or flow. So what I'll have clients do to figure out exactly what works for them is we start by listing 50 to 100, I said 50 to 100 activities that they love doing.
Oh, they love doing, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And anything goes. So it can be, playing with your dog, going on a walk, skiing, gardening,
making pies,
making rhubarb pie. Exactly. And really going through that list. And also as part of this list, they include the things that they love doing that maybe they wouldn't consider very healthy, right? So I love having that glass of wine. I love engaging in a little bit of poontang, some sexy time. I love X, Y, and Z. I love having that cigarette. It really makes me feel good. Whatever it is, put it all down. And from there, once we have that list, no judgment in creating that list, then we move on to the second piece. But I do want to add one little nuance on that list. And the reason that we include all of those things that don't feel so healthy is because the brain is a really interesting piece of equipment, if you will. So oftentimes when we're trying to brainstorm ideas or we're trying to create a list, if an idea comes up and we throw it out, sometimes what we can find may happen is that our brain will fixate on that thing. So I know for me, when I initially was creating a list, I would write, gardening, playing with my dog, eating cookie dough. Oh no, I can't, right? I can't write cookie dough. You can get salmonella from that. And that's unhealthy. You can't do that, right? So my brain was like, oh, no cookie dough, no cookie dough. Let me come up with new ideas. But then as I'm trying to brainstorm new ideas, all my brain is doing is saying cookie dough, cookie dough, cookie dough, cookie dough, right? And then we get stuck in a rut. It's like a writer's block. And so that is the reason we write down every idea that comes to mind. So then once we have that list, then we move on to the next piece. And the next piece is asking ourselves 4 really important questions. One of which is, if I did this activity every single time I was stressed out, would it be healthy? There goes the cookie dough. There goes the wine. There goes naps. There goes pretty much all
naps are healthy.
not in. Now here's the thing, and this can
Yeah.
this can go down the whole,
you realize I'm challenging you.
oh,
right?
I love it. Yeah, no, this actually goes into a conversation that I have with many of my clients, which is the difference between numbing and nurturing.
Oh, yeah, good.
Right? Because there's nothing wrong with cookie dough, especially the edible kind, right? Where you
Or
can't
tequila.
Nothing wrong with tequila. Nothing wrong with a frozen margarita. I love me a frozen margarita, but the energy behind it is really important. Am I doing this to numb something, to avoid something, or am I doing this because I love margaritas and I'm nurtured? I worked really hard. This is a reward for the week.
Yeah.
And that's the basic energy that we want to make sure that we're doing. So in asking that first question that I shared, it's not that you can never do these things, right? But it is that if you do these things, they have to be from a place of nurture.
That's good because, I told you earlier I got my second shot last night, right? Or yesterday. And then I went to an event sponsored by the chamber here. It was fabulous. The first time in well over a year that all chamber members were able to get together safely at the Carlsbad flower fields, which I might send you a picture of. So gorgeous.
Oh, I need to see.
Yeah. But I have to say on the way, I was headed home and it's just like, I got my second shot and everybody's talking about how you might feel, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going, something's creeping up on me. And so I went to one of my favorite restaurants and ordered a dinner to take out that I really, really like, actually prime rib. I don't do it very often. I don't eat a lot of meat, and I'm actually transitioning out of meat into impossible stuff. But then I got 2 shots of tequila too. But I was aware of, I hear what you're saying in terms of numbing. Okay, so we numb things. Alcohol, numb, sex, numb, addictions, numb. But in this particular context I wanted to be numb. And I wanted to give myself a good, healthy dinner that I could just crash on.
Yeah.
So, but I do exactly what you said is, which is, if I'm going to have some tequila or something, as an example, am I doing it because to numb something, or am I doing it because I enjoy it? So I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah, and so that would be a really great example. And in that scenario, my guess is that it was a combination of numb and a combination of nurture, actually.
Yes.
Right. So we think about, if it were me, if that were my meal, I would have definitely had the prime rib as my nurture because my body needs protein and I wanted
and
a
that
real
was mine.
meal. Yep. And then the numb would, for me personally, then be the tequila. That addition.
Yes.
Now it can go the other way.
Yeah, that's how it was for me.
Yeah. So that's a really important. I love that you brought that forward because it's really important because it's not about giving up all the things that we love doing. There's nothing wrong with those things. Nothing wrong with sex, nothing wrong with alcohol, nothing wrong with food, nothing wrong with these things. But the energy in which we engage with it is very, very important because if we engage from it from a numbing standpoint, we rob ourselves of the opportunity to do the work, to get to the root of what's causing that stress or that overwhelm on a daily basis, to find that peace across the board. So anyway, so we go through these 4 questions, and I have a free download I can make sure that I get you the link to for the show notes.
Is that on your website?
It is, but I have to make sure I get you the right link.
Okay.
So I'll make sure. It's not necessarily easily findable, just because this is not something that I typically bring forward. So this is good. So we go through these 4 questions, and then from there, after we kind of narrow down our list, then we have a list of activities, creative stress reduction activities that we can do anytime we're experiencing stress. And we can say, okay, I'm freaking out right now. I'm overwhelmed. I'm X, Y, and Z. I'm going to, you can take your finger and point to a random item on the list. I'm going to do this. And again, the goal is to nurture, to get us out of fight, flight, or freeze into that rest and digest mode so that we can return to whatever it is that was stressing us out and address it.
But by the way, I want to just mention the rest and digest is really, it's a new concept for me, and I really, really like it. I really like it a
Oh,
lot.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
such
that's
a
what
great.
that's what I'm doing today. There was a couple of events this afternoon, and I just thought it's not about, there was stress involved in going to these because I'm just not feeling 100% after the vaccine, whatever. And I just thought, nah, just rest. But
Yeah.
then you brought in the word digest. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm.
Well, one of the other things that we talk about, there's so many symptoms, negative symptoms, and associated with stress. One of them is that it slows down digestion. So we have that extra weight, that extra fogginess, that extra heaviness. It's
I
because
actually
when we're
didn't know
in,
that.
oh yeah, yeah, when we're in fight, flight, or freeze mode, the digestion slows down, so that if we were in like a primal situation, we can run, we can really show up physically. Now, it doesn't apply for when we get an email, right? And it gets triggered. But that's really what it was there for. It slowed down digestion so that you didn't have to stop, go to the bathroom while you're being chased by a bear, da 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 da.
I didn't know it. I love it. I'm going to keep that one on top.
Yeah, one of the best weight loss tips. Manage our stress so that our digestion can actually work at its highest, best functionality. Not that that is always the goal, right? The goal for me personally is just to have my body be functioning at its best, not necessarily lose weight. But that is one of the great weight loss tips that no one's talking about of our age.
No, that's good. That's fantastic. Yeah, you're very resourceful.
Oh, thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, so I just want to add one more thing about that, and then we can move on to wherever the conversation takes us. But it is important for us to do this list, when we're in a fairly level state of mind, right? Because of that critical thinking piece that we were talking about earlier. And it's important to have this list easily accessible. So whether it's in your phone or a notebook that you carry around a lot, right? So that whenever that stressful situation comes up, you don't have to engage your critical thinking right, and try to problem solve. You can just say, where's my list? And you can go to it, you can grab it, and you can take it from there.
It's good. I love it.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a whole lot more, but we'll save it for later. So